Did Gen X secretly grow up with the weirdest movie library ever? Before streaming told us what was important, these films lived on late-night TV, dusty VHS shelves, and random weekend broadcasts that somehow burned themselves into memory. Some were funny, some were unsettling, and some felt like childhood dreams turning strange after midnight. Today, we're counting down 15 forgotten 60s movies that only Gen X still remembers. And number 1 may be the strangest memory of them all. Number 15. The Ghost and Mr. Chicken, 1966. Some movies do not scare you because they are terrifying. They scare you because you remember watching them alone when the house was too quiet. The Ghost and Mr. Chicken is one of those strange little comedy gems that Gen X didn't discover in a theater. They discovered it on local TV, weekend reruns, and half-forgotten family movie nights. Don Knotts plays Luther Heggs, a nervous small-town typesetter who dreams of becoming a real reporter, even though his own imagination seems determined to defeat him first. When he agrees to spend a night inside a supposedly haunted mansion, the film turns into a perfect blend of goofy panic, creaky atmosphere, and old-fashioned mystery. The organ music, the dusty rooms, the nervous faces, and Knott's bug-eyed terror give it a weird charm that still works. It is not a horror film in the usual sense, but it understands childhood fear better than many serious thrillers. For Gen X viewers, this was the movie that made haunted houses feel funny, but never completely safe. Number 14. The Trouble with Angels, 1966. Before Teen Rebellion became louder, darker, and more dangerous, it wore a school uniform and smiled like it knew exactly what trouble was coming next. The Trouble with Angels follows two mischievous girls at a Catholic boarding school, where pranks, secret plans, and emotional lessons collide under the watchful eye of Rosalind Russell's Mother Superior. Hayley Mills plays Mary Clancy with just the right mix of charm and defiance, turning every hallway into a battlefield between youthful chaos and adult authority. What makes the film linger in memory is not just the comedy, but the bittersweet feeling hiding underneath it. The girls are not simply breaking rules. They are testing the world, testing faith, testing friendship, and slowly discovering that growing up means losing some of the mischief that once made life feel magical. Gen X viewers often met this movie through television reruns, where it felt gentle, funny, and oddly comforting. It is a forgotten coming-of-age film with a soft heart, and a final emotional turn that quietly catches people off guard. Number 13. Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines, 1965. This is the kind of movie that feels like it escaped from a Sunday afternoon TV schedule and never came back. Those Magnificent Men in Their Flying Machines is big, colorful, silly, and strangely hypnotic. A comedy adventure built around the early days of aviation, when flying looked less like science and more like a daredevil magic trick. The story follows an international air race from London to Paris, with pilots from different countries bringing their pride, rivalries, and ridiculous flying machines into one grand comic spectacle. What makes it so memorable for Gen X viewers is the sheer scale of it. Before digital effects, every crash, wobble, and impossible-looking flight had a handmade charm. You can almost feel the canvas wings shaking in the wind. The cast leans into broad national humor, slapstick timing, and old-fashioned adventure energy, creating the feeling of a live-action cartoon with a massive budget. It is not a quiet film. It is a parade, a circus, and a history lesson, all pretending to be a race. For kids who caught it on television, it felt endless in the best way. One strange airplane after another, one disaster after another, all wrapped in a playful sense of wonder. Forgotten now by many, it remains one of those movies that Gen X remembers not because it was subtle, but because it was impossible to confuse with anything else. Number 12. The Great Race, 1965. Long before action comedies became loud and overloaded, this movie turned chaos into a full-blown carnival. The Great Race is one of those huge studio entertainments that feels almost too big for the screen. A madcap road adventure where every scene seems determined to outdo the last. Tony Curtis plays the heroic Great Leslie with shining confidence, while Jack Lemmon steals scenes as the hilariously dramatic Professor Fate, a villain who seems to have stepped out of a silent cartoon and into a Technicolor world. Natalie Wood adds glamour and sharp comic energy as Maggie Dubois, a determined reporter who refuses to simply stand on the sidelines. The plot follows an outrageous automobile race from New York to Paris, but the real pleasure is watching the movie keep escalating. Breakdowns, disguises, rivalries, sabotage, and one of the most famous pie fights in film history. For Gen X viewers, this was the kind of movie that could appear on television and suddenly take over the entire afternoon. It felt old, but not boring. Silly, but never small. Its humor came from timing, scale, and pure personality. The film belongs to a lost era when studios could build an entire world just to knock it down for laughs. Today, it may feel oversized and old-fashioned, but that is exactly why it lingers. It is a reminder of when comedy did not just want a joke, it wanted a parade, a villain, a hero, and a final mess big enough to become legend. Number 11. The Russians Are Coming. The Russians Are Coming, 1966. A Cold War panic comedy should not feel this warm, but that is exactly why this one still sneaks up on you. The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming begins with a simple accident. A Soviet submarine runs aground near a small New England island. From there, the film turns fear into farce, showing how quickly rumor, suspicion, and confusion can turn ordinary people into amateur warriors. Alan Arkin gives one of his earliest major performances as a Russian officer trying to fix a mistake before the situation explodes, while Carl Reiner, Eva Marie Saint, Brian Keith, and Jonathan Winters help create a community caught between terror and absurdity. What makes the movie memorable is that it does not treat the Cold War like a simple joke. Under the comedy, there is a sharp human question. What happens when people stop seeing enemies and start seeing frightened people trying to survive the same disaster? Gen X viewers often met this movie on reruns, where its strange rhythm stood apart from louder comedies. It had shouting, confusion, boats, guns, misunderstandings, and a title so long you remembered it even if you forgot half the plot. But beneath the noise, the film has a surprisingly gentle heart. It turns political fear into a neighborhood meltdown, then slowly reminds the audience that panic is usually more dangerous than the strangers we are told to fear. That mix of comedy and Cold War anxiety gives it a lasting, oddly comforting power. Number 10. Support Your Local Sheriff, 1969. Some westerns ride in with thunder. This one strolls in smiling, then quietly makes fun of the whole legend. Support Your Local Sheriff is a clever western comedy built around James Garner's effortless charm. He plays Jason McCullough, a calm drifter who enters a gold rush town overflowing with greed, noise, and trigger-happy chaos. Instead of behaving like a traditional western hero, he treats danger like a mild inconvenience. That relaxed confidence is the movie's secret weapon. While everyone else panics, threatens, or performs toughness, Garner simply watches the madness unfold and finds the easiest way to outsmart it. The film plays with almost every Western cliché: the lawless town, the powerful family, the nervous mayor, the jail with no bars, the clumsy deputy, and the inevitable showdown. But it never feels cruel toward the genre. It teases Western myths with affection, like someone who loves cowboy movies enough to laugh at their habits. Jack Elam adds wonderful comic oddness as the deputy, while Walter Brennan brings old-school menace wrapped in grumbling authority. For Gen X viewers, this was the kind of movie that lived comfortably on afternoon television. Easy to watch, but hard to forget. It felt like a Western your parents might enjoy, but with enough sarcasm to make younger viewers lean in. Beneath the jokes, it has a smart idea. Real courage is not always loud. Sometimes, the coolest person in town is the one who refuses to act impressed by danger. Number 9. The Party, 1968. One wrong invitation can turn an elegant Hollywood mansion into a slow-motion disaster zone. The Party is a strange, delicate, and chaotic comedy from Blake Edwards, built almost entirely around Peter Sellers' gift for physical timing. Sellers plays Harundi V. Bakshi, an accident-prone actor who is mistakenly invited to an exclusive Hollywood party after causing havoc on a film set. The setup is simple, but the movie stretches it into a long comic experiment, where tiny mistakes grow into impossible disasters. A spilled drink becomes a social crisis. A confused conversation becomes a trap. A bathroom, a bird, a waiter, a dinner table, and eventually a pool all become part of the same escalating nightmare. The film is also complicated today because Sellers plays an Indian character through an old Hollywood comic lens, something modern viewers may find uncomfortable. But as a Gen X memory piece, it remains tied to late-night TV, cable reruns, and the odd fascination of watching one man silently dismantle a party without meaning to. What makes it stick is not the plot, but the rhythm. The movie moves like a live-action silent film trapped inside a glossy 60s mansion. Every room looks perfect until Bakshi enters, and then perfection begins to collapse. For viewers who discovered it young, The Party felt like forbidden grown-up comedy without needing anything outrageous. It was elegant, awkward, and increasingly unreal, a reminder that Hollywood glamour can become ridiculous the moment one outsider walks through the door. Number 8. The President's Analyst, 1967. This movie looks like a spy comedy, but underneath the jokes, it feels like a nervous breakdown wearing sunglasses. The President's Analyst stars James Coburn as Dr. Sidney Schaefer, a psychiatrist chosen to treat the president, a job so secret and stressful that it turns him into the most wanted man in America. At first, the premise sounds playful. One doctor knows too much, so every agency, enemy, and hidden power wants access to his mind. But the deeper the film goes, the stranger it becomes. It turns paranoia into comedy and comedy into prophecy. The targets are everywhere: government surveillance, political obsession, intelligence agencies, suburban life, and even the growing power of communication technology. Coburn gives the movie a cool, slippery center, moving from calm professional to hunted man with stylish exhaustion. For Gen X viewers, this was one of those odd films that might appear late at night and feel too weird to explain the next day. It was funny, but not cozy. Colorful, but not innocent. The film's satire has a cracked energy, as if the 60s themselves were spinning too fast, and this movie decided to laugh before the machine broke apart. What makes it especially fascinating now is how much of its paranoia feels less absurd than it once did. The idea that everyone is being watched, tracked, analyzed, and manipulated no longer feels like wild comedy. That is why The President's Analyst still works. It begins as a joke about power, then quietly becomes a warning. Number 7. Lord Love a Duck, 1966. This is not a teen comedy. It is a candy-colored warning sign with a smile painted on it. Lord Love a Duck is one of the strangest high school satires of the 60s, a movie that seems playful on the surface, but grows sharper and more uncomfortable the longer it runs. Roddy McDowall plays Alan Musgrave, a brilliant and unsettling outsider who becomes obsessed with helping Barbara Ann Green, played by Tuesday Weld, get everything she wants: popularity, clothes, attention, status. He treats her desires like a mission, and the movie turns teenage ambition into a surreal social experiment. What makes the film so unusual is its tone. It is funny, but the humor feels dangerous. It mocks consumer culture, school politics, parent-child confusion, and the way young people are taught to measure themselves through image. Tuesday Weld gives Barbara Ann a fascinating mix of innocence, vanity, and sadness, making her more than a simple spoiled teenager. And McDowall, meanwhile, plays Alan like someone who understands the world too well and has decided to weaponize that knowledge. For Gen X viewers raised on later teen films, Lord Love a Duck can feel like a bizarre ancestor to darker high school stories. It has the surface of a beach-era youth comedy, but the soul of something much more cynical. This is the kind of forgotten film that feels ahead of its time, because it understood something ugly. Youth culture was already becoming a marketplace, and everyone was learning how to sell themselves. Number 6. Wild in the Streets, 1968. Every generation thinks the young are dangerous, but this movie took that fear and turned it into a nightmare campaign poster. Wild in the Streets is a wild political satire about Max Frost, a rock star who rides youth rebellion all the way into national power. At first, the idea sounds like a rebellious fantasy. Teenagers and young adults finally take control from the older establishment. But the movie quickly twists that fantasy into something darker, asking what happens when anger becomes policy and popularity replaces wisdom. Christopher Jones plays Max with a detached, almost ghostly coolness, while Shelley Winters brings emotional weight as his chaotic mother, and Hal Holbrook appears as a politician who thinks he can control a movement he barely understands. The film captures a specific 60s fear that youth culture, music, protest, and media attention might completely overturn the old order. For Gen X viewers watching it later on TV or tape, it felt bizarre because it was both dated and strangely familiar. The clothes, music, and slogans belonged to another era, but the obsession with fame, power, and generational conflict never went away. Wild in the Streets is not subtle, and that is part of its strange power. It shouts its warnings through rock music, political rallies, and outrageous plot turns. What remains fascinating is how it refuses to make youth automatically heroic or age automatically wise. Instead, it shows a culture so hungry for revolution that it forgets to ask who is holding the microphone. Number 5. The Loved One, 1965. Hollywood rarely looked this polished while saying something this cruel. The Loved One is a pitch-black satire about death, glamour, business, and the strange American talent for turning everything into a sales opportunity. Based on Evelyn Waugh's novel, the film follows a young Englishman who enters the bizarre world of California funeral homes, where grief is packaged, beautified, and sold with a smile. The cast is loaded with eccentric energy: Robert Morse, Jonathan Winters, Rod Steiger, and Jeanette Comer, and a parade of memorable faces who make the movie feel like a nightmare cocktail party. What makes it unforgettable is the tone. The film is elegant and grotesque at the same time. It looks bright, clean, and expensive, yet every scene seems to whisper that something is deeply wrong beneath the surface. The comedy is not soft. It is sharp, uncomfortable, and sometimes almost surreal. For Gen X viewers who discovered it years later, The Loved One felt like one of those grown-up movies you were not sure you were supposed to understand. It mocked industries, manners, romance, and even the way people perform sadness. But it did so with such strange confidence that you kept watching. The film belongs to a rare category, a studio comedy with a poisoned center. It is forgotten, partly because it is difficult to neatly label. Is it funny, disturbing, elegant, or heartless? The answer is yes, and that is why it still feels dangerous. Number 4. Bunny Lake is Missing, 1965. The scariest thing in this movie is not a shadow in the hallway. It is the possibility that nobody believes you. Bunny Lake is Missing is a psychological mystery from Otto Preminger, built around one terrifying question: what if a child vanished, and the world slowly began to suspect the child never existed? Carol Lynley plays Anne Lake, an American woman in London, who arrives at a school to pick up her young daughter, only to find that no one can clearly confirm seeing the girl. Laurence Olivier brings authority and intelligence as the police superintendent investigating the case, while Keir Dullea adds an uneasy presence as Anne's brother. The movie begins like a missing person thriller, but its real power comes from doubt. Every room feels suspicious. Every calm explanation feels slightly wrong. Even ordinary details, a school record, a toy, a memory, become pieces of a puzzle that may or may not exist. For Gen X viewers who caught this on late television, it had a special kind of tension: quiet, black and white, and deeply unsettling without needing constant shocks. The film's London atmosphere adds to the unease, making the city feel both elegant and cold. What keeps Bunny Lake is Missing alive is its emotional trap. The audience is forced to stand beside a woman whose fear is being questioned in real time. Is she a desperate mother, an unreliable witness, or the center of something carefully hidden? That uncertainty turns the movie into a slow, stylish nightmare. Number 3. Seconds, 1966. This is what happens when a midlife crisis stops being a feeling and becomes a science fiction nightmare. Seconds is one of the darkest and most haunting films of its decade, directed by John Frankenheimer, with a cold, dreamlike intensity. The story follows Arthur Hamilton, a dissatisfied banker who is offered a shocking chance to leave his old life behind and receive a new identity, a new face, and a new beginning. After the transformation, Rock Hudson appears as the man Arthur becomes, younger, handsomer, and supposedly free. But the film understands something chilling. Escaping your life does not mean escaping yourself. The new body, the beach house, the parties, the promise of reinvention. Everything begins to feel less like freedom and more like a beautifully designed prison. Hudson gives one of his most surprising performances, filled with confusion, longing, and quiet terror. The black and white cinematography makes faces stretch, rooms tilt, and ordinary conversations feel like traps. For Gen X viewers who discovered Seconds on late-night television or through cult movie circles, it felt unlike typical old Hollywood. It was too cold, too strange, too psychologically raw. This was not shiny science fiction about rockets or monsters. It was about identity, regret, and the terrible fear that the life you wanted might still not save you. The film's power has only grown because its central fantasy is everywhere now. Become someone new, rebuild yourself, start over. Seconds asks the question nobody wants answered. What if the new you is just another mask? Number 2. The Swimmer, 1968. A man crosses suburban swimming pools like a hero, but every step feels like he is walking deeper into a ghost story. The Swimmer stars Burt Lancaster as Ned Merrill, a confident, sunlit man who decides to swim home through the backyard pools of his wealthy neighbors. At first, the idea sounds almost whimsical, like a strange summer adventure through privilege and memory. But as Ned moves from pool to pool, the mood begins to darken. Smiles fade. Conversations turn sharp. Old wounds surface. People react to him not as a charming neighbor, but as a man connected to some disaster he refuses to face. Based on a John Cheever story, the film turns suburbia into a psychological maze. Every backyard looks beautiful, yet every beautiful space hides disappointment, judgment, or loss. Lancaster's performance is fearless because he begins with heroic physical confidence and slowly lets it crack into confusion and desperation. For Gen X viewers, The Swimmer was the kind of movie that seemed boring for 5 minutes, then quietly became impossible to forget. It did not explain itself in the easy way TV movies often did. It trusted atmosphere, repetition, and emotional dread. The pools become chapters in a life story Ned cannot fully admit belongs to him. What makes the film so powerful is that its mystery is not about crime or conspiracy. It is about denial. By the end, the journey feels less like a swim across town and more like a man trying to outrun the truth, one glittering pool at a time. Number 1. Pretty Poison, 1968. Some forgotten movies do not fade because they were weak. They fade because they were too strange to fit anywhere. Pretty Poison is a dark, slippery thriller that pairs Anthony Perkins with Tuesday Weld in a story that keeps changing shape just when the viewer thinks they understand it. Perkins plays Dennis Pitt, a troubled young man with a habit of fantasy and deception, newly released into ordinary life, but still trapped inside his own dangerous imagination. He meets Sue Ann Stepanek, played by Weld, a small-town high school girl who seems innocent, bright, and fascinated by his stories of secret missions and hidden danger. At first, the movie appears to be about his manipulation of her. Then, with brilliant cruelty, it begins to suggest that he may not be the most dangerous person in the relationship. Weld is extraordinary because she lets Sue Ann's sweetness become something unreadable. Her smile becomes a question mark. Her calm becomes threatening. Perkins, already associated with psychological unease, brings nervous vulnerability rather than simple menace. The result is a film that feels playful, romantic, frightening, and tragic all at once. For Gen X viewers who found it on late-night TV or through cult recommendations, Pretty Poison had the shock of a movie that refused to behave. It looked like a small-town thriller, but moved like a trapdoor opening under your feet. That is why it deserves the top spot. It is forgotten by many, but once seen, it leaves behind a strange aftertaste, the feeling that innocence may have been the perfect disguise. And that is the strange beauty of these forgotten 60s films. They were not always perfect, but they had moods, faces, and endings that stayed buried in memory for decades. Gen X did not just watch them, they discovered them by accident. Which one do you remember most? Drop it below and subscribe for more forgotten cinema gems.